Nicola, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really delighted that you're here, and we're both sitting on in front of our computers, which seems to be the norm, the norm today. And I've got a few questions for you. And the first one really is around what have you and what have GIBS done amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and crisis to shift, to alter, to change, to accommodate some semblance of business unusual.
Louise, it's lovely to be here, and thanks for having me. So COVID-19 has brought significant changes to GIBS. As a business school, we obviously teach academic programs. We also have a lot of executive education that we run. And then, of course, as with any part of a university, there's the element of research. As we started sensing what was going on with COVID-19 and what might be happening and the need that we might have to close down, we had to start doing some early planning. But we're a school that is focused on face-to-face engagement. We're focused on people coming together in a sense of community, breathing the same air, because I think nowadays saying that you're seeing someone and listening to someone is what we're doing now. But this question of breathing the same air, sense-making collectively, being able to move around a room to do that, being able to leave a room and go and experience something else, that's in the DNA of our way of doing things. So having to think about, well, how does one shift that and move required a huge amount of change. It's been significant change for our students who have gone online. It's been significant change for our faculty. And of course, then to move an entire, the whole body of employees to start working from home has been massive, remarkable change. I think it's only when you experience something like this that you realize that actually the formal structures and the processes and the ways that you've got of knowing how to navigate the world are really up for grabs. They're not necessarily going to serve you going forward. But I think what has certainly served us at GIBS has been an ethos that embraces shift, a can-do sense, and a recognition that there's a need for collegiality. There's a need to be kind. There's a need to be vulnerable. There's a need to and a space to actually admit that you don't know what you're doing, and to learn from each other. And so, as huge as the shift has been, it's been enabled by, without a doubt, a single thing, and that is mindset. It's a mindset that enables one to deal with the flexibility. I think there's also, in addition to mindset, it's a heart set. It's something that says we care about each other. And suddenly you realize that the people that previously were okay, in many cases are more vulnerable because of their situation, because they're sitting with immunocompromised conditions, because they're living on their own. And then there are others who one just never realized how strong they are, how incredibly open they are to change. But being able to communicate about where we find ourselves. When you sit on your own in the dark to try and make sense of the world, you need to open windows, you need to let light in, and you need to let other people into your world. And thank goodness we have the technology that enables us to have this kind of conversation and has enabled our activities to continue.
Nicola, I just love your philosophy, and I love the approach of the school. I mean, I think it's something that has always appealed to me and so many others about GIBS, and it shines through when you're on campus. And I love that, breathing the same air and sense making when we're actually together. And how do we actually bring that into these engagements that have other stresses? If we're doing lots of Zooms all day, we've got a different sort of need in terms of our attention span, how we're actually working. And from a practical sense, Nicola, what have you, how are you holding classes? Have you suspended classes? Are you holding classes? What have you done from a very practical perspective?
So it obviously depends on whether we're talking about the executive education space, in which case we already had some online classes. Those continue, our online courses, where we're working with one-on-one clients. In surprisingly quite a few cases, clients have said the program must continue. We move it into online mode, and we've been able to do that. So where you've got individuals who have access, and we need to be really careful here, because when we talk about divides and we talk about inequality in our country, it's obviously a function of economic inequality. But when one starts looking at digital inequality, that's also critical. So in a lot of cases internationally, you will have seen that universities have moved online into what we call emergency remote teaching mode. And many of them have done exactly what we're doing today. They've gone into Zoom, they're using other learner management systems to hold what we would refer to as synchronous learning. So that means you and I are exactly what we're doing today. It's in this, at the same time, we can have a conversation. We cannot make the assumption that everybody who is one of our students can do that. And so for multiple issues, connectivity is one aspect. The cost of data is another aspect. We're one of, in terms of data costs, we're an incredibly expensive country when it comes to data, and particularly mobile data. We've also got, in our context, we've got students who are working, and many of whom have been called into essential services, so not even the level 4 services. The other issue is that where previously we might have had a student on campus for a full week, so some of our MBA students will come in for a week at a time, and they will be in classes from 8 until 5. You and I both know that when we get up at the end of the day of multiple Zoom sessions, we're stiff, we're sore, we're not hearing anything. We are not designed to sit like this in an 8-hour learning intervention. So for us, we made the decision that we were not going to leave any student behind. And that's been the case also in the case of the University of Pretoria, who've had much greater challenges because they're dealing with student hunger there. They're dealing with students who have no devices, who might be coming from rural areas where there's no connectivity. And so it's a real challenge. But in our case, it's meant that we have moved into what we refer to as asynchronous mode, which says we don't make an assumption that you and I will be in the same space at the same time. My role as an educator is to guide your learning process. Some of it you'll spend on your own. Sometimes you'll be able to contribute to a learning platform. I'll ask questions, you'll give answers. And in certain cases, we might be able to get together in small groups for tutorials or for a session with a lecturer. But unfortunately, we can't make the assumption that everybody can just miraculously transition from being in a classroom environment into a Zoom environment and everything will carry on the same as it once did. So I think it raises really interesting questions for us and as a country, as a South African, around how we navigate this time in a way that is socially responsible. There's a temptation as we have this change thrust on us to just want to sort of go into the cave, reach out through a screen, and this recognition that for many of our fellow citizens, that's not the reality that they can embrace at all, is sobering.
Yeah, and I think I was chatting to somebody yesterday who is on a school board, and he's also an essential services provider in forestry, funny enough. And we were exploring education and all of these ramifications. So I think you're right, it is definitely very much country specific. And then, of course, it's an economic issue as well that we need to look at as a community. Nicola, which parts of this do you think you might keep? So I know it's really tough to look at the future right now. Forgive me. And I know that we're playing into, we will have some learned experience over this time. There'll be parts of this that we think that it works well, or perhaps we can use it to democratize education in a window into something that we just socially didn't have before, perhaps, or economically we can create those conditions. So just, dreaming for a moment, connected to what we're learning, as we move forward day by day. Which bits of this do you think might be worth keeping?
If you were to ask me, Louise, what are the major challenges that we face as organizations, as a business school? 4 months ago, before the pandemic really sort of hit our radars, I would have said that there were a couple of key themes that we knew change was coming, and we were already in the change. One of them was obviously digitization. And I don't want to specifically mention 4IR because I think as a country I maintain that we've got a lot of our citizens have not even had access to the second industrial revolution, let alone the third. But when we start looking at digitization, I think the issue was that the force for change was not strong enough relative to the force to keep on doing things. And what COVID-19 has done is thrust us into a forced learning curve that we would be absolutely crazy if we didn't use it to reassess the way that we do things. So it's not just about how we deliver learning. It's made us go, well, what is it that we really need? What are those systems and processes that are now redundant, that we've learned that we can actually do far more simply without the kind of administrative burdens perhaps that we might have had. So this question of we're in this incredible global laboratory right now. We need to be using it to experiment with things and say, let's try this. We had a team that approached me last year and said, we want to work flexi, open plan. We've been moving to hasGIBS for a long time, which is a big change for an academic institution. But also we want to move flexi time. So I said, okay, let's run an experiment. Let's give it a try. And thank goodness we did, because that team was able to give us huge insights when everybody had to work remotely and far more flexibly. And, you know, what's been interesting around it is that some teams have gone, well, there's just so many things that we can do differently. We don't need the same amount of office space. There's a whole lot of things to do differently. At the same time, it's reinforced that a number of teams have said, but we love being together. But we would hate to do this forever. But we want to be at work and doing our thing more for the social connection than because work is the only place where we can work. So we have to use this as a time to rethink how we do these things. So I think the digitization is one force. I think the other thing that we've been incredibly aware of is the question of what it means to be a responsible citizen, to consume responsibly, to produce responsibly, and that's consumers, producers, to live responsibly. And I think as we start seeing in this incredible global experiment that we're living in right now, as we start seeing the cause being attributed to a mismanagement of the interface between the human race and the natural environment, and we start seeing evidence of what happens when we actually stop breathing out carbon dioxide over the entire planet and just live a little more slowly and a little more gently, that has to also give us cause to reflect on who is it we really need to be. And what is it that we really need to do as a human race? So for me, what would be very, very sad is if we don't see this as a window into a different kind of future. And if we don't, when things settle, which they will, it may take years, but they will settle. If we simply revert back to totally old ways of doing things, then we can truly argue that the cost of this pandemic will have been unbearable. The only way that we can justify the cost of the pandemic is in looking at it as something that has promoted change. And what we have to do is pull out what is it that we don't need to do anymore that really is unnecessary, what are new and better and more efficient ways, and then what is it that we really want to keep from the world from which we've come, and what is it that we truly value. So I think it's an incredible time for introspection as the human race on a country level, in our organizations and where we see them moving to. And then, of course, just Louise, as human beings, figuring out what really matters.
Yeah, I think our thinking is pretty much aligned around that, and action as well, because of course, all of these things, it's amazing to have this time to allow this to filter through and to move into that phase of trying different things out, because there is no right or wrong, and it's really up to us in terms of finding a way forward that is in a highly inequitable environment, that actually makes sense, where we can use what we've got. I work a lot with futures, and there's been some amazing stuff coming out from all over the world, and I think one of the common golden threads for me is pretty much reflected in what you're saying right now, Nicola, and that is that, a lot of our truths and our myths are starting to fall away, and our attachment to them, because they just don't help us right now, and they're kind of meaningless. And the second part of it is that the deep inadequacies and vulnerabilities in all of our systems are being shown to us. And the question is, do we patch it all up again and move on, or do we actually? I don't actually personally think that we'll be able to do that quite, in the way that we think that perhaps some people might think it's possible. But how do we evolve from this? And I think that's always been the question: is how do we do what we do? And if this pandemic brings that to front of mind for most people, then I think already we're on the right path, or we're on a far more positive path than we were. So Nicola, one very last thing, and I guess it's only pertinent that I ask you, in your role, with your amazing experience and insight into businesses around South Africa and Africa, what is your advice for the average? I mean, there is no average person in South Africa. It's a bad start, but just some advice from what you've learned going through this. You've already popped some amazing pearls of wisdom in there and some insights and connectivity. But if you could leave us with something that that really speaks to you right now.
I think, Louise, there's a balance between that we have to strike, and it's a difficult balance. There's a balance between knowing and doing, and perhaps I should talk about not knowing and doing. So the first thing is that if we are in our vulnerability looking to a person, a group, government, business leaders for the answer, we're being very naive, because there is no answer. We're facing a complex situation, and assuming that somebody has cut out a path that we can all walk down is absolutely false. We are going to have to make our own path. And the only way that we're going to make that path is to make sure that we're asking the questions we should be asking and working together to answer them. So that's important, first of all, for leaders who feel a pressure from the teams, the groups, the people, the companies, the organizations, to have the answer. They have to let go of that. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be asking great questions. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be exploring to try and think about what next. And in some cases, when a sense of what's the word I'm looking for? Paralysis hits, as it does hit, as it's part of the natural stress response. When people wake up at some point and go, now what? Then the answer is to go, what's the next step? How do you put one foot forward? We've all had these experiences. Maybe they've been physical experiences, difficult times. Sometimes you just got to put one foot forward. But to try and see the future is futile. To explore what might be, to conceptualize different paths, to engage with other people, to try and sense make, I think is absolutely critical. And I don't think that sitting mindlessly watching images of media, particularly what's coming out from the United States at the moment, is helpful in sense making. So my advice to people is to read widely, but talk widely, engage widely, wonder widely at both the wonder and the of the world, as well as wondering what we should be thinking about. The second point is about doing. And I think in many cases, when we're faced with a situation that we just don't know how to engage with, sometimes we wait for somebody else to do something. We're human beings with remarkable agency. If your agency is extending to neighbors, if your agency is extending to a community in which you live, your agency is extending to reaching out to somebody if you're privileged enough to have a job, reaching out in the organization if you have some extra capacity to offer to support, listening to that person that you're speaking to who sounds a little bit down and finding out if they're okay, reaching out as a human being. So for me, those are the two really important things. One is this: don't look for the answers, but don't stop wondering. And the second is taking action. And it doesn't matter what your action is. Some of it is just action in our own homes. We are all under incredible stress. It's a time to be kind. It's a time to be gentle, but it's also a time to give whatever it is you have to give. And it may be time, it may be financial resources, it may be wisdom, it may be expertise, the opportunity to have this conversation, your giving of your time. You've reached out to me. I was keen to engage. This is more of what we need to be doing that connects us as human beings.
Yeah, what a lovely note to land on. Nicola, thank you. I won't keep you any longer, but thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute delight talking to you, and yeah, just wonderful to have have that wealth of insight and obviously connection. And I'm going to keep wondering. I'll definitely take that away.
Thank you, Louise, and thanks for reaching out, and thanks for including me, and looking forward to seeing all of the conversations that you have with everybody.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nicola.
All right. Amazing.